Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It sounds like an incredible lineup. So lucky everyone on the call. My name's Rosie Hoggmascall. I'm a product-led growth consultant, and I also write Growth Dives, which is a weekly newsletter where I tear down lots of different examples of product growth and UX. So I started in growth at What's Three Words a few years ago, and I was a growth manager, and I was doing lots of analytics. It was hardcore analytics, working out how to grow the product, how to measure retention, lots and lots of tricky stuff. And then I worked at a really small seed stage sex therapy app called Furly, where I was doing the product management, analytics, and the performance marketing. And then I moved on to Peanut, which is it was a almost Series A app for women and mums to find friends. So if you're pregnant and you don't have any friends, it's like a Tinder style product where you could find friends near you. And so after that, I went freelance, and I've been freelance for 3 years now, and I have clients like Miro, Blinkist, and lots of different types of products where product-led growth is really key to the user experience, both across B2C and B2B. And we'll talk a bit more about what I define as product-led growth, what is product-led growth in a bit. Yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you so much. That actually leads perfectly into what I was going to ask you first, which is for anyone here who's not sure what you actually mean by product-led growth. So what are the kind of foundations of it? And like if you had that mindset, what would the mindset actually be?
I think there's so many ways to define it, and I think it's been quite a buzzword over the past few years. I think when you read online, sometimes you think it's a free trial or a freemium experience, or it's like virality. But for me, it's a lot more expansive than that. So for me, product-led growth is any way that your product leads to growth. So that could be you monetizing really well and reinvesting that money back into a marketing budget to grow. I call that product-led growth because your product is working for you to drive that budget. It could be that your product is way better when people use it, therefore you grow through referrals and virality. Or it could be your product gets things from users that we can then use to acquire more users. So it could be your product is a way for people to talk to each other or to post, and you use that content to then acquire more people via SEO, for example. So product-led growth can be your product is literally inviting more users, being viral, and that's the classic way that people think about it. But for me, it's more helpful because I think virality and referrals and that classic way that your hockey stick growth because people are inviting everyone, that's like classically what people think. But I don't think that's helpful for a lot of businesses because that's a very small subset of businesses. So thinking about product-led growth in a more expansive way, as it could be conversion, it could be improving retention so you grow in a compound way, it could be monetizing better to improve your budget. So for me, it's a wider thing, and it's much more helpful to think of it as a mindset, like you said, instead of one single tactic like freemium. That's not just product-led growth. So the mindset of product-led growth is how can we make sure that this product is so well oiled in the acquisition, the conversion, monetization, so that we can build the business.
What would the alternatives to product-led growth be? Like from a mindset perspective, I guess that the product isn't working as part of the growth engine, but what might other tactics be that people are using right now?
Non-product-led growth
Yeah.
stuff. So I
Yeah.
think when someone's really heavily reliant on performance marketing and they don't quite have the growth loop going. So say you're spending like 5 to 10K per month on ads, and you're not actually generating 5 to 10K per month from ads. That would be, I would class that as more of a performance marketing strategy without necessarily the growth loop. You might just be growing. It's not necessarily as scalable, but it's something people do just before fundraising rounds to see, to get numbers going up and into the correct direction. But I wouldn't necessarily call it product-led growth because your product's not then actually producing enough money to sustain that budget. So for me, product-led growth is like a sustainable thing where you can grow in a compound way, and other things maybe performance marketing, PR, like other things you can call up turbo boost. So I don't know if you've heard of this framework called the race car growth framework. If you think of like a Formula One vehicle, it's got the engine, and the engine is the growth loop. So that could be you're growing through SEO and content, you're going through a sales loop, you're growing through virality. And then there's turbo boost, like to get you going, when you're like, I don't really watch F1, but when one car is behind another, they get kind of like that boost.
Mm.
That's like the things that aren't, they're tactics, they're not sustainable, but they can help you in those moments where you need to overtake someone or you need to fundraise. And those can be things like PR, running an event, or getting one viral moment with an influencer. Those things can really help the numbers, but if you look on a longer time period, they're going to be like a blip and it'll go back
Yeah.
down. So it's not like, it's not a thing that kind of, your money and your resources and your time is not going in to create something that grows in a compound way. They're useful, but in certain situations, like just before a fundraise.
Yeah. And I guess for those things, you're mainly looking for customer acquisition because you want to onboard a huge amount of customers and then tell investors that you've got this huge jump in customers. But then if you're going for a product-led growth approach, maybe you're measuring slightly different metrics, or there's different metrics which are more important to you, which might be around retention. Can
Mm-hmm.
you talk a little bit more about what you might be measuring from a kind of metrics perspective, or early indicators that you're focusing on the right thing?
Definitely. I think a bad sign is when you've got your metrics in different sheets. You've got your acquisition measured differently to your product. You need one sheet where you have the whole funnel. And it's so important that you measure that. It doesn't have to be death by measurement, like one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen. I like come into a business and they've got 20 dashboards with like 5 different things on each. That's overkill and it's very distracting. So there's like you need to be measuring things, you need to understand the funnel, but you don't want to do death by numbers because then you're distracting your focus as well as your team's focus by measuring every single up and down everywhere. So there's two sides of it. But for me, what you need to be measuring is acquisition. So what is the top of funnel volume? Like that could be website visits a month. It could be people viewing your app store page if you're an app. It could be number of sales calls you have in the diary, like the biggest number, and try and do it kind of a one number, and then you can get more detailed on that later. The next one is like, what's the next biggest step for them? Normally it's like some sort of registration or they're giving their personal details, and that's the first indication that they want to, you've built the trust so that they give you their email. So normally it's like top of funnel, what's that big number? Then it's the sign up. How many email addresses do we have, for example? Then there's the next biggest action, which is sometimes setting up on your product. It could be a free trial, it could be payment at that point, depending where your paywall is. And then you want to have, what's the next biggest setup action that actually correlates to retention. We can talk about that a bit more later, that magic moment. And then lastly, retention. Retention is very hard to measure and some people kind of overcomplicate it, but you want a metric that is someone's using the product. So it could be someone's logged in, it could be someone's clicked something, it could be someone's just had a session. As long as you can measure that accurately over time, you can start to say, what percent of people that came in on day 1 come in to log in on day 30, day 60, day 90. And that's only 5 things you're measuring: acquisition, registration, the next biggest conversion moment, monetization, and retention. And if you just had that, that's really key. Because some people, even if they're going to go and raise a seed round, they don't actually have the analytics in place. And then they're in a place where they can't trust the data. And then if you're like, oh, what product like growth strategy should we do? The answer is like, I actually don't know because I don't know what's working. I don't know where the bottlenecks are. So it's so important to measure at least those 5 things in as simple and accurate way as possible, making sure that your engineers or whoever's implementing that are confident in that data. And then on the other side of the scale, do not go and have so many dashboards that you can't make a decision. That funnel is the most important. And then looking at some benchmarks, what good looks like, and it'll be quite clear. Oh, actually, and normally the case is people aren't getting through the early part of the funnel. Like it's more impactful to work on the early part of the funnel. You've got more eyeballs there, you've got more people, and normally there's something really straightforward around why people are not getting through. Like, is the button in the right place? Sometimes it's not. Is it buggy? Can they actually get through? Is the funnel too long? Is the funnel too short? Like there's quite a lot. There's like the stuff in the early funnel is always the most impactful, especially at this stage. Maybe you've
Yeah.
already worked there. And then moving further through the funnel is more impactful.
If you've got a few different ideas about different things that you could test, like you kind of have an assumption that this thing might work in terms of, I don't know, asking your current customers to refer new business or increase the pricing, or I'm just thinking about like a few different tests that you might be able to do if you've got a small cohort of customers already. What's the kind of most effective way to test things and then validate which is the most successful before you double down on it? So especially if you've got a small budget and you want to do something that's going to be really impactful.
For me, I've seen the biggest jumps in businesses where they're focused on one thing first, because it normally takes around 4 to 5 tests to actually have a win. So like win rate on experiments for early stage startups is 1 in 4, 1 in 5. If you're like a scale up, it's normally like 1 in 10, 1 in 26 tests work. And so if you were going to change something on monetization, like change the price and then change the onboard and change this, that's one test in each area. So it's unlikely to have an impact. What you want to do is measure that funnel, say, okay, only 1% of people on our landing page give us their email. That should really be between 3 and 5%. How can we 3x the number of people who give us their email address on that page, number of people who sign up? Look at the page yourself with your team. Is there anything glaringly obvious? Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. Sometimes when you've been staring at your product and it's your baby for so long, you're so blind to the things that are actually there, you can't see. So one of the most illuminating things is just watching people go through, like physically sitting next to a customer or being on a call with a customer with their screen sharing or your screen sharing, and like, hey, just verbalize, what's your expectations from what this product's going to do for you? What would you do next? What would you do next? And just hearing the fears people have on your pages, hearing like any hesitations they have when they go through your experience. So when I worked at Peanut, the audience is mums, pregnant women, new mums, new families. And so I have like lots of cafes near me where there's lots of mums that go and they have their like mum dates. So I was just there with my coffee, like, who can I ask? I had that product in my hand on the welcome page, and I would just go like, hi, I'd love to buy your coffee. I work for a product that's for mums, and I'd love to get 5 minutes of your feedback if I can buy your coffee. And it was terrifying. Like,
Yeah.
probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done, just randomly walk up to people in cafes. But you can see people go through, and it's so illuminating. So I think normally you'll have an idea of what needs fixing. You need to run at least 4 or 5 tests for one of them to work. You need to be working in one area, so they're having a view of your bottlenecks work. And then if you're stuck, or if you're consistently surprised, I think that's the other thing. If you find yourself consistently surprised by the result of your experiments, it's kind of an indicator that you might need to go and speak to someone, speak to customers, and watch them go through to generate some new hypotheses about what might need changing. I also think making sure that your ideas come from the whole team is useful. I always found when I was working in a little squad with an engineer and a product designer, and I was kind of the growth manager, I'd always get completely different ideas from those two types of people. And so getting a range of ideas from them too.
With some of those benchmarks that you just talked about, like you're only getting 1% of people giving their email address and you want it to be more like 3%. Is there industry benchmarks that are kind of like publicly available for different business models so people know what kind of good looks like or what the average should be?
Yeah, definitely. So I think my favorite is Lenny. He often does big surveys, Lenny Rachitsky. And if you type into Google activation rate benchmarks Lenny and retention rate benchmarks Lenny, those two are really good for activation rate. It's generally around 40% of people should be getting to your key moment. So if you're a content business and watching something, or if you're a B2B SaaS tool and they need to, record a conversation on your calendar, 40% of the people who sign up should do your action. That is great. Like 40% is great. Normally it's like 10% or less when you start. But that 40% comes from Lenny, and he breaks it down by marketplaces, B2B, B2C, B2C freemium, B2B paid. So I would just look at that. And he's got the median and then the best and the worst. And it's always with a pinch of salt. So I had a couple of clients where they were celebrities and then they'd built an app, and I came in saying, this is roughly a conversion rate. Actually went into the data and their conversion rates were like 3 times what I'd seen in my life. I was like, this is incredible. But contextually, if you think about it, this is someone who's built a brand over a really long period of time, and anyone who follows them loves them. So if, say, you're going to download an app from a footballer you love, you're probably going to go through the funnel. So you have to take some benchmarks with a pinch of salt, where if you have an incredibly high intent audience, they're likely to go through your funnel a lot quicker, and you'll have higher conversion rates. If you're like mass market, you're going after loads of people and your acquisition is kind of very broad, you might have very low conversion rates through your funnel because those people might not have any idea who you are. That you might be going after people not quite right for your product. That can mean that you have lower conversion rates too. So there's always, take all things with a pinch of salt, but the benchmarks are useful to just make a decision. That's the
Yeah.
thing. I wouldn't take them like as gospel, but it's like, okay, we've got so many things we could do. Let's use this as another data point to try and make a decision about where the team should focus to get those 5 experiments.
On that note, because you kind of mentioned the brand, do you think it's worth for any founders on the call that are kind of pre-launch and so they don't have customers yet, or they might not even be trying to acquire customers at this point, that building that brand or building a community or like an engaged group of potential customers is useful then, because you might then have a higher conversion when it comes to the point that you're ready to convert them?
Brand's a really interesting one, and it doesn't normally fall into growth. So I think there's a couple things on brand. One is if you're health tech or fintech, brand is actually really important. So one of my clients is around IVF and needing to talk to clinics and the patients. If you have a really ugly website or really like not necessarily ugly, pretty and ugly, sometimes ugly converts really well. But if you have something that doesn't look trustworthy enough for the medical institutions, that's where brand is really important. If you're like a budgeting app for women, you might not necessarily need such a strong brand because the price point is £30 a year and like, whatever, let's just do it. So there's different industries where brand is really important, fintech, health tech generally. In terms of whether brand has an impact on conversion, I've never measured it in a way that it does, because you need to be like massive scale up, massive budgets, and have like really big like predictive models for your marketing to work out whether your brand spend actually impacts things like conversion. So I wouldn't even bother to try and measure that at this point. As a general rule, over time, and time being like years, brand helps conversion. It's not a measurable thing, but some massive companies have measured it. And then in terms of building a community, I think it's really valuable to have a few early users who you can, sometimes people call it the customer advisory board or the user advisory board. And they're people who are, power users at the beginning, and they're happy to talk to you often. So you're like, hey, we're going to build this new thing. Like, you happy to chat to me about it? Or we just want to get on a call with you. And there's like a group of like 5 to 20 people who will test your beta, will give you feedback, who will be really honest with you. And I think that little group of people are really valuable for your product and getting feedback really quickly. So I think that's good. And then a wait list is slightly different, where you might not have a product yet. You might have a landing page where you're just collecting people. Wait lists are useful, but they often get cold because people don't email them, or they don't kind of keep them. I was going to say keep them fluffed up. That's not quite right. If they don't keep them warmed up. So I think those 3 different things. Brand is important, definitely in certain sectors. I wouldn't try to bother to measure it in terms of conversion, because you'll be doing that for years and years. You need like you need to spend at least 2 million a year on marketing to start to try and measure that sort of thing. And then having a user advisory board is incredible, an incredible resource. And then the last thing would be, yeah, building a community beforehand. I think it has to be relevant. I've seen a lot of products try and build a community where it doesn't actually add to the user experience, and it's kind of like a side add-on. In that sense, you're going to spend a lot of energy trying to keep the community alive. You'll know a community is a good idea when it runs itself. That's a good measure for, should we have a community? If you try it and people are chatting by themselves, they don't need prompt questions, they don't need introducing to each other. If a community runs itself, it's relevant and it's worthwhile. If it's completely dead in there and you're like, oh, this taking me ages, that's the signal that community is not quite right in the way that you've set it up for the product.
That makes sense. When you're talking about kind of speaking to that user or customer advisory board, or maybe if someone here has got customers, outside of the actual kind of like numerical metrics or how much is converting and how many people, is there any qualitative metrics that are useful to measure through those customer insight interviews or early conversations with potential customers?
Mm-hmm. I love the Sean Ellis way of measuring product market fit. And I think people are like, oh, we're not going to bother to do that because it's not accurate. But what you want to do is you want to be measuring it over multiple periods of time to see if you're changing, and also add in other data to it. Because any survey by itself or any kind of set of customer interviews, people are always going to tell you what they think you want to hear. So you need to have multiple. I try and go a qualitative measure and a quantitative measure. The qualitative measure, I would read, if you type into Google Superhuman, how Superhuman found product market fit. That article is excellent because it goes through the methodology of how you run this survey. Essentially, you want around 200 people, and it's how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use this product? They need to be people who've used your product, and you want 40% of people to be very disappointed if you were no longer around. The other questions are then, what value do you get? What would you improve? And then some demographic questions. So you can split your 200 people up into what job type are they, what age or what gender, or what do they want to get out of it, and see who you might have better product market fit with. That I find the most valuable for working out what features you should build next or what should be on your product roadmap, because you can say, okay, we have product market fit with the people who understand our value to be this, and the people who are not so sure about that, of whether we're worthwhile, but they understand the value. These are the things that they want to improve, and that's the reason they're on the fence. So logically, if we improve those things, we'll bump those people up into more I love this product type mentality. And so that survey has been so useful for cutting out the noise, because when you've got lots of users, you can think, oh, we've got so many feature requests, we've got so many things that people want to improve, but actually in a harsh world, if you've got a set runway, you shouldn't be implementing things that your power users want, because they're already power users. Like, that's not going to improve your metrics. You need to be implementing the things for the people who are on the fence about loving a product that will actually move your metrics. So that's why I find the product market fit survey so useful, because you can separate those two types of people, and you have to be really harsh about what feedback you listen to. Obviously, if it's been 7 months and you haven't improved anything, then your power users might start to get bored. However, normally, like, you don't actually listen to your power users in terms of feature requests that often. So I have the product market fit survey, measure it maybe every quarter, every half year, because it can be quite a lot of work. And then the second thing is retention, and looking at those retention benchmarks. And I think having that product market fit score and retention together, normally for me, they actually match, because it's 40% very disappointed and 40% month 2 retention would be incredible. So it's actually kind of 40%. Most things here are like, do at least half of people get to the activation moment? Do at least half of people come back in the second month? A third is good, but you kind of want to be bumping up to a half in a lot of these metrics.
Yeah. Speaking of product market fit, I was doing some mentoring a couple of weeks ago with very early stage startups, and I asked them whether they thought they had product market fit, and all of them said yes. And then when we kind of dove into it, some of them said like, oh, we had it and then we lost it, and then we had it and then we lost it, or maybe, yeah, we had product market fit with this one particular feature, but then we pivoted, or something. Like, what would I guess, kind of from your experience, do you think the companies that you worked at, did they have product market fit when you started working there, or did they achieve it at the time that you were there? And was there this like moment, like an aha moment of like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to actually get to product market fit? And then do you think you could lose it with a particular subset of customers? And like, how do you keep the momentum?
Yeah, it's a really meaty one, product market fit. So most companies I work with, I wouldn't say have product market fit. A lot of the time, I think what I've seen is people look at a subset of the audience, look at the power users, look at the metrics of power users, and like, look, we have a product market fit with a small subset. But product market fit, by definition, is you need it enough to keep the business going. And there's only a couple of businesses that I've worked with who definitely have product market fit. One was super early stage, and their graphs were literally hockey stick. They were like that, and we didn't know why. And I was like, we actually need to understand why, because if something breaks and that goes down, we won't know. So that was one. I was like, okay, that's definitely true. And it was so easy to show to investors, and that was good. But they actually had other problems. They had operational problems. They were building big AI models. Like, they had other problems that were bigger than that, actually, keeping up with that. Most products I haven't. And it's when you're getting like single digit month-on-month growth, like less than 5%. I mean, that's more like B2C, like B2B SaaS. But if it's really hard to sell in calls, like really hard to get someone on a call if you're sales, if it's like single digit month-on-month growth, if you're finding that people don't really get it, if you're finding that it feels a bit sluggish, that's not often when you don't have product market fit. But running the survey, if you don't have 40% very disappointed, you don't have product market fit. If you don't have, at least a third of people, ideally 40% of people coming back in the second month, if you're in a SaaS product, then you probably don't have product market fit with enough people. Because you can have it with 1 out of 100 people. You don't call it product market fit. But one of my main client at the moment, where Fractional, we measured it last year, mid-year, and we're going to measure it again at the end of the year, it has been on the up because we've narrowed in. It's a really busy space. And we're like, okay, why are we better? Why do we have product market fit with these people? And then we zeroed in on that for 6 months, and we actually reversed the growth slump we were seeing by really focusing on the two things that were the reasons we had product market fit and the two reasons why the people on the fence didn't love us. And slowly we've reversed it. We were on the down, now we're back on the up. And so that's been really, really impactful. So I think it's a really tricky thing to measure, but just try and do a qualitative measure and a quantitative measure. I think you've got two sides. Obviously, you've got the sides where you need to sell your business and you're like, of course we have this. Yes, confidence. And then you've got the product side where you need to be really critical and ask a lot of questions and write down a lot of assumptions and be like, okay, do we actually have this? Yes, we told the investors we do, great. But do we actually have it? How do we get there? It's really important that we nail this, because I've been at two businesses that were already more like scale ups and they didn't have product market fit. They didn't. And it's way worse later when you're in a growth slump in a business that's got like 200 people in it, because you don't have product market fit. Like, people don't need the product. And then you're spending like hundreds of thousands on marketing. No one's really paying, no one's really converting. The numbers are like pretty flat. And it's like, okay, what do we need to do? And it's not just put more money in the top, it's like solve really fundamental problems. But when you've been going for like 5, 6, 7 years at that point, it's really hard to turn the ship around. So it's much better to get it right now. And it's much cheaper later on because it's easier to acquire people, easier to share the product, things like that.
It's kind of crazy when you think about the fact that there's companies with that many employees that have gone through that many rounds of funding. But I think there's the investors say the same, like they don't expect you to have product market fit at pre-seed or seed. Like Series A rounds is typically when they're looking for product market fit, or that's when you should be achieving product market fit with that round of funding. So I think some investors might think it's a bit naive almost to go in and say that you've got it when you're raising your pre-seed round, because it's more like you've got these early indicators that you're building something that your customers are going to love, but you haven't got to the point where you're like chasing the customers because they're all coming to you and they're so desperate to use your product that you can't fulfill the demand. A couple more questions from me, and then we'll move it to Q&A. I know there's a few questions already coming in on the chat. And if you want to ask Rosie a question live, you can do so by raising your hand. Just wanted to talk a bit about some behavioral stuff. So if you're looking at the top of the funnel, so someone lands on your website, for example, from your experience, do you have any tips on how to maximize the conversion at that stage, or like maximize? Well, yeah, let's start with that, and then I'll go on to the next part later because it's completely different.
Top of funnel is in on landing page, or do you think more?
Yeah, like someone, I guess the first thing that someone would do when they get to your website. So they already know that you exist by that point.
Messaging is super important, and it's one of the hardest things to get right. I think lots of companies are still iterating on their messaging. But for me, I think a lot of what people do wrong is they try and target too many people at the beginning. Like, we are for everyone, and then that means that your messaging gets really diluted. It's much better to say we are for this specific person, so that your headline can be crisp and very specific. Because then someone's like, oh, great, this is for me. And the people who are like, oh, this is not for me, they go off, they like piss off. So your conversion rates can actually improve when you've got really clear messaging, when you're really clear on who you're targeting, and your customer discovery calls and making sure that you've got a good value proposition is key on that. That's like a whole other area. Daphne Tideman writes a lot on that. She's got a message market fit course, and that's the one I found the most useful and tactical. It's like, how do you actually do these interviews? How do you actually know that a message is worth iterating? So I think message is the most important on a landing page. Brand is sometimes important in your sector. It needs to look a bit slick if you're kind of healthcare or fintech. And then acquisition source is really important. So are you just going after loads of random people, or you actually do have a targeted approach? If you're going really broad, your conversion rate would be worse. If you're going really specific, like we've got good messaging on our ads, or if you've got an SEO strategy, is your SEO strategy the right level of intent? Like if you've got an SEO strategy that's like targeting super broad keywords, and then they come to your landing page and no one's converting, it's because your strategy is very broad. So you need to make sure that your acquisition strategy matches your landing page and people are getting a good full end-to-end experience. It's quite useful to go through your experience open up an incognito tab and just go through the whole thing, or get someone, every new person who joins your company, it's a really good task actually, get them to go through the product all the way from your acquisition source, like if it's an ad or an article or if it's a sales call, get them to go through and document the whole thing, because sometimes you can see some incongruities, some irregularities in how the funnel feels. But messaging is the most important thing, and then as you get further in the funnel, making sure that you're getting them to like one magic moment, I think.
Yeah, we were talking to the former CMO at Monzo, who then went on to start a grocery delivery business. And he was talking about the test that he did. So for the grocery delivery business, he didn't know whether it was cook fresh meals in under 10 minutes or come up with new recipe ideas, or but he didn't know whether it was like simplicity or the financial benefit or like the creative thing that was what people actually wanted. So he wrote down like 40 or 50 different potential messages, like taglines almost. And then he had different ads running with those different taglines. But then he realized that you don't want to go to you don't want to see an ad that says save time cooking fresh, and then you go on the landing page and the landing page says save money on your recipe box, because it's not consistent from one to the other. So we used this tool to generate different versions of the landing page so that there was consistent messaging the whole way across. And then they just looked at what was working the most, or where they got the most clicks from the ad to the website, and then from the ad to the website to people actually signing up, and then doubled down on that. We can post that link in the chat.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I would also, a cheaper test, there's two tests you want to do. Those kind of A/B tests where you're like, we've got this, and I wouldn't try and maybe not go with 40. Really be strict and ruthless. Maybe get it down to 5, because then you can get decision paralysis. And I've been there where you've had 20 customer calls and then you've got like 40 different ideas for messaging. You need to be like really strict with yourself. But the other one's a 5-second test. I don't know if you've heard of these. And it can be done with anyone, not necessarily your target customer. But a lot of the time we get in our heads about the way to write things, especially if you've talked to a load of customers recently, and you can find yourself writing sentences that don't actually make sense. So the 5-second test is you show the landing page or the app store or the header to someone for 5 seconds. You don't count loud, count in your head. Then take it away and ask them, what did you read? What did you see? And then what does that mean? So 2 questions. One is about legibility, like can they see it? Is it big enough? Is it clear enough? Does it make sense? And then the next one is like understanding. So what do they expect that page, that product to be based on that headline? So yeah, lots of the time your headline's actually not that legible. It's actually convoluted and confusing. And the second thing is, are you actually being clear? So I think the 5-second test is a good, really cheap one to run, just as a quick ask 5 people 5 seconds. And then the A/B testing is, yeah, that's a really good one.
And last question from me, again, kind of from your experience, for anyone here that has freemium products, any tips on how to convert someone from a freemium to a paid, or if there's a free trial, getting them to convert to the paid version, or if there's just a free for life version of the product, how to upgrade them to a priced tier?
I think one of the biggest pitfalls on that one is giving away too much for free. Obviously it's freemium and people think, oh, people need to get value, but you also need like an end point to that value, so they actually have the motivation to upgrade. There's no motivation to upgrade because they're getting enough for free, they won't upgrade. So there's a really good sub club podcast on Headspace, and Headspace used to have, I think, 40% of their content, or a very large generous amount of their content, for free on the freemium, and they basically wanted to improve their revenue and improve their the amount of money they were making. And they slowly did these tests where they locked a lot of the content. And if you listen to this podcast, it's like they locked 70%, 80%, 90%, 95%. So that's 95% of the content in the freemium experience was locked. And they were terrified, because it's a scary thing to do. Like, people are going to be outraged. We're going to get so many customer support requests. This is terrifying. What if everyone leaves? Like, that sort of like thought comes through. But actually, and every time I've done this with a client too, it's like nobody messages you. Nobody really bats an eyelid, but you get way more people paying. So there's a fine line with how much you give away for free, how much do you lock. Ideally you want a graph of like number of times people does this thing, or number of things, and then like conversion, and there'll be like a curve will level off. So say it's like number of videos people need to record before they're hooked and like retention. It'll be like video 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it'll level off. Or maybe it's like fitness videos people need to watch until they retain, and it will be like fitness video 1, 2, 3, and then it'll level off. So you want your metric along the bottom and you want your like retention on the side, and you'll see that it levels off. And you want to put your paywall along that point at somewhere. So like how many things do you give away before you lock it? And go a bit more restrictive than you think. And that will really improve your conversion. There's also a reverse trial where everyone comes in, everyone is then allowed everything, and then you lock it all after 7 days to continue. That's sometimes a bit more dark if like people don't know it's happening, so you need to be clear in your messaging. But yeah, I can send that Headspace one recently. Because, for example, we did the product market fit survey with a client, and one of the questions was, are you paid? Yes, no. And then we called people, and for the people who loved the product, definitely product market fit with those people, but don't pay. And I was like, so you love the product, I hear this, great. So what's the reason that you haven't upgraded? They're like, oh, I'll just get enough. I don't have time to read all this, so why would I upgrade? And so that was a clear indicator that we're giving away too much free. Then we locked a lot of the content and we like doubled conversion. It's quite a scary thing to do though, but it is, when you listen to the Headspace podcast, it gives you a bit more calm that someone's done it before and it's not the end of the world.
I guess the good thing about that too is like if you give away more for free at the beginning, you can start like tearing it back. So it's not like what you've decided to do today is going to be what you have to keep rolling out like forevermore. Like it's, even if it's better to be slightly more restrictive now, if you have gone a bit too generous, like you can change that in the future if you need to. But I know there's a especially if you're fundraising, there's this like battle between, oh, we've got 10,000 users, but 7,000 of them are not paying anything, versus we've got 5,000 paid users, but then we haven't got the same total number of users because we lost some by putting a charge in place. So I guess there's always that like, what are we optimizing for here? And if it's investor conversations, it might be different for if it's just like a sustainable business that you're just trying to build and be revenue generating.
I would also say it's a very hard pill to swallow when, people have tried your product, you paywall it, and then they don't pay. That's a more existential question of like, why not? And you really need to then talk to those people. Like we saw, you listened to 5 things and you saw the paywall, but you decided not to pay on that. Would love to know like what's going through your head at that. What were your fears, what were your anxieties, like what was going through your head at that moment? And you really want to understand why someone hasn't paid, even if they've tried it. And it could be that your product's positioning is not right. It could be that you're a vitamin instead of a painkiller. Vitamin being like, I need to take my omega-3s, but I can't really be bothered and I'm not going to die. Or if like I've got a massive headache and I need to take an ibuprofen, you want to be the ibuprofen. So you need to think, if people have tried my product, say they've recorded 5 videos, but they're not ready to pay. Why is it? Is it price? Is it positioning? Is it product? And then if it's price, you give them a discount later. If it's positioning, you can test some other, ways to position your product. If it's product, is there something that's missing that they would pay for? So that's a really hard question, and that's one that you need to dig into if it does happen, like not shy away from it and just pretend everything's fine. I think sometimes asking the hard questions will get you the most growth in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to move to the cohort Q&A. So Rohith, we'll start with you and then I'll take some questions from the chat.
Thank you, Buddy. So, my question is to Rosie. So, basically, you were talking about the product market fit. So, from my experience of product market fit and product growth, it's basically like tracking various product metrics like retention rate, CAC, and customer lifetime value, right? So, are there any other indicators which provide a key indication to product market fit for early stage startup?
I would not overcomplicate it. I would keep it very simple. Retention is the most important thing. If product market fit, people will continually use your product. So retention is the most important. Lifetime value, personally, I don't think always indicates product market fit, because you might have product market fit, but your lifetime value might be rubbish because you actually haven't monetized well, and that's a monetization strategy problem. So I would keep product market fit very simple. I would just measure it with a mix of like retention and conversion, probably be more retention. So do people come back and use the product? And the qualitative measure, which is the how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use this product? I would try and keep it really simple. Lifetime value is like a business model. Do we get people paying
Correct.
enough over a long period of time? Conversions often, retention is really interesting because what you might see is when you measure retention, you can see a very large drop off and then a flat line. The flat line is the people you have product market fit with. The very large drop off is often like people haven't actually got to the magic moment. Like sometimes retention is masking a conversion problem. So if you can fix conversion, get enough people to that key moment, then the more people retain. Do you move that flat line up? So yes, product market fit, I would try and keep it simple. Don't do 5 measures of product market fit. Just do retention, Sean Ellis survey. And then if you wanted to add another one, I would just do how easy is it to get with calls with customers? How easy is it to get them on sales calls? How easy is it for, are people leaving loads and loads of positive reviews without us prompting them? Are we getting so much customer love? Are we not keeping up with like database demands? Are we just growing so much that we can't keep up? That's the last one, which I find the most unhelpful,
Okay.
which is why I don't normally mention it.
Thank you.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Thanks. Whilst you were talking about magic moments, there's a question from Edward in the chat. So do you have any, I guess he's asking for examples, but another question that I had was, how do you find out what the magic moment is if you don't know what it is?
Yeah. First, I do a little brainstorm with the team or with yourself. It's like, what are the things that people do in the first week? What are the things that we think people need to do in this product? So if you are, for example, I did a deep dive on Calendly the other day, and you need to integrate your calendar. So if I was doing a brainstorm about like what do people need to do to set up Calendly, which is like a calendar scheduling tool, you need to integrate with your calendar. You need to put Calendly into a meeting. You need to like book a call with Calendly. You need to send Calendly out to people. You need to actually successfully have a call that was booked with Calendly. Maybe someone reschedules. There's so many different things that people could do within the first week with this product. Brainstorm them, put them down on a sheet. And this is the bit where you might need enough users and at least some analytics tool to do this. But essentially what you want to do is you've brainstormed all the things that people do in the first 7 days that you want people to do. You need to look at 3 metrics for these. The conversion to that thing. So how many people actually get there now? How deep is it in your funnel? So conversion to integrate calendar, conversion to book a call on Calendly, conversion to reschedule a call on Calendly, for example, if you were Calendly. The next thing is you look at the cohort of users who have done this thing. So you need to be able to say, okay, we've got cohort A who have done this within 7 days, cohort B who have done this within 7 days. And I usually use Mixpanel to do this, or download a Google Sheet of like the user, the date they did this thing, the date they did that thing, the date they did that thing, and you can do some sheet stuff. But essentially you want your brainstorm of magic moments, how many people actually get there, so conversion to that event, the retention of that cohort. So if someone has integrated a calendar within 7 days, how do they retain versus the average? So you have retention for each of these things. And then the last one can be monetization. So conversion to being a paying user for each of these cohorts. And so what you'll then have is a table of action 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many people get to that action at the moment? Retention if they do get to that action, and conversion to payer if they do get that to that action. And then you can color code it and say, actually, this event number 4, if people get there, they've got 4x the retention of people who don't. And that's the insight that you need to be able to direct the team to say, right, everyone, we need to get people to this action, because if we do, we can 4x retention. Often what you see is it's not quite 4x, because sometimes the people who, and that's a correlation analysis. So if people do A, what's their retention? If people do B, what's their retention? So that table is amazing. You need enough users to be able to do that. I think less than 200 users would be really tricky, because as soon as you start slicing users, then your sample sizes get super small. Say you had 30 people in each of those buckets, that might be okay. And you also need analytics to be able to do that. So bare minimum, have a Google Sheet of the user, the date that they did action A, the date they did action B, the date they did action C, and then you can work it out from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. James, I was actually just going to ask you a question in the chat, but I can see that you raised your hand, which might be for a different question, but I'll let you take yourself off mute and ask whatever it is.
Yeah, Rosie, you just mentioned Mixpanel.
Mhm.
Which tools would you recommend here? There's Amplitude, Mixpanel, and a few other things away from like Google Analytics. Yeah, just maybe you could share your thoughts on what rabbit hole we should spend our time diving down.
What product do you have?
I've got a D2C consumer facing product, right? And I've just started looking at Mixpanel. Someone else recommended it to me, and you just mentioned it as well.
Mm. So Mixpanel is amazing, and I've used it for apps, mobile apps. So Mixpanel and Amplitude are the two big competitors for mobile apps. You pay normally on a up to, I think it's up to 500,000 MAU. There's like up to a point you get free. I think it's maybe the first year, if you're under a certain revenue, you get completely free. What can happen is later on, the builds for these tools can get a lot, so you need to make sure you're using them well. Mixpanel, I love. Mixpanel's my favorite. I don't really like Amplitude, but they do the same thing. It's just the UI is nicer on Mixpanel. However, Google Analytics is free, and it is a beast. But if you set up your events correctly, it's just way cheaper. And a lot of people do use Google Analytics. Down the line, there's an analytics setup that people normally have is early days, you might either use Google Analytics because it's free and try and set it up properly, or you can use Mixpanel or Amplitude if you want some deeper level, but then you pay for it, you need to integrate it as well. Down the line, a lot of the time, what people do is they have an analyst or two and they have data engineers, where then you'd have your back-end tables of all your data, and then those people would pull out that data into your charts on like Looker or Data Studio, or there's lots of different tools, so like Pendo, for example, is another one. So further down the line, you might have analysts who do that for you. Then you wouldn't need like Mixpanel, Amplitude. But
Yeah.
I like those tools because anyone in the business can use them. They're so easy. But I think if you're a website, I think most people just use Google Analytics until they're at the size where they have analysts.
Yeah.
I haven't personally seen someone use Mixpanel super well for a website, but I'm also not D2C in my specialty, so I don't have
Yeah.
the exact answer there.
And just quickly squeeze in one follow-up one, if that's all right. Look, my business is exactly like you say. It's out in the ether of the internet. How many visits? Then it's a free sign up, and then it's a trial and a paid. So that's the journey of the funnel. What's your thoughts on funnels like Russell Brunson bangs on about, and having like type forms or having some kind of questions to validate the customer? What's the balance there between validation for person versus making it having more friction points and stopping people actually signing up? What's your take?
There's definitely good friction and bad friction. So I know that there's a lot of different companies. For example, take any sort of fitness product. Say you're signing up to a fitness product and they asked you your name and then you were in. You would be a bit suspicious about the quality and how personalized it was, because it's normal when you sign up for some sort of healthcare product that they're like height, weight, diet, family history. They ask you so much, and then because it's expected, it's good friction because two reasons. One is expected, so sometimes people get suspicious if it's too easy to get into your product, if it's normally a sector where you need a lot of information to personalize. The other thing is that the poor users, not poor monetarily wise, I meant like the lower quality users in terms of how relevant they are for you, will drop off at the earlier funnel. So who you're left with at the end is the very high converting users because they bothered to get through the whole thing. So that can be a benefit, but if you've only got 100 users at the start and you get 2 out the end, then you've got really low volume. A lot of people have shoved in a quiz and not seen any. Normally what happens is people are like, we should put a quiz in. They put a quiz in and it flops. Because with anything, you really need to test it a lot. What are the questions? What's the language? How many questions? What are you asking? How do you use that? Then do you send them like a tailored email sequence? There's just so many variables with that. When you do it, you have to think, I'm not just going to plop this in and leave it to gather dust. This is an area where I need to do at least 10 experiments to make this work. So I think healthcare, supplements, that sort of thing is often quizzy. Like when I worked in sex therapy, big quizzes, like lots of quizzes, therapy, like supplements, that sort of thing. If you're buying lipstick, probably not. So I think it's a sector thing, and I think it's an expectation of the customer, but there is such a thing as good friction. because there's also a psychological principle of the labor illusion. No, is it labor illusion? There's either sunk cost effect or labor illusion. I can't remember the exact one, but it's like, I have set this up, therefore I might as well continue. So sometimes because people feel like they've curated their experience, they're more likely to convert. So putting like a question in doesn't have to just be seen as friction. It could be a good thing because people feel like they're curating. It could be a good thing because people feel like they're being listened to. Like I've seen a lot of quizzes where you tap on maybe you've got options A, B, and C. You tap on C and it's like, what do you hope to achieve? Like lose weight, for example, really bad example. But say you picked that, and then sometimes in the UI it can expand, being like 58% of people who use this product have actually achieved that goal. So you can use it to like reinforce value propositions, reinforce social proof, personalize the experience. Like questions are incredible, but normally not in V1 because they all flop when the first time you put them in. You have to see it as like an area you're going to experiment and put resource in. And ideally you've got some idea of why it might be good for you. Like why, normally when you copy a product, it doesn't work. You have to think, why does this work in my situation, for my customers, for my product, in my sector?
Thanks. Kind of last question from me. If there's anyone else has a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we can see whether we can get through it in the last couple of minutes. With Google Analytics, as you mentioned it, would you recommend that all founders start using it kind of like ASAP? Because I think one of the things that founders think, especially if they're pre-launch, is that they don't really have any metrics or any kind of early growth indicators or nothing that they could be measuring at that point. So would you recommend that they start looking at this and tracking it early, or is there a particular point within your launch that it makes sense to start using analytics?
I would do it early because you normally can't backdate. So say like normally when you measure things, I think Google Analytics will automatically measure all your page URLs. So if you will normally have all that data. But if you want to did someone click on this button on my page? You're going to need to track the button. Say it's like 2 months later and then you track the button, you can never ever get that data back. You can't backdate data that you haven't tracked. I wouldn't also though go in and track every single thing in the world because then you get a lot of tech debt and you don't actually use a lot of stuff. So what I do is just get a blank Google sheet, just note down like your hypothetical funnel. We want people to view the page, we want them to click that thing, we want them to get that page, we want to sign up, then we want them to click that thing, like roughly like a very high level funnel. Like then try and just do those bare bones. Like think of it as a bare bones skeleton. What is like the different bits of the spine that I need to measure? Make sure that you can measure them. It could be that you get someone in for a day and just like to review your setup and be like, these are the events that I want to track. This is what I'm seeing. Have I set it up properly? Because that will just mean that a lot of the time, say you're going to launch a new feature, you're like, great, we're all excited about this new feature. You get to the end and everyone's like, does it work? And you're like, actually have no idea because we didn't track it. And that's the worst place to be because you don't have any learnings. So I think getting your tracking in early is better, but you don't have to overcomplicate it. And I hate Google Analytics with a passion, but it's free and it's often like the best thing to go for really quickly without having to integrate something massive.
And is it easy for a founder to set up that has no experience using that before? Or do you think
I actually don't know. I have never set up a Google Analytics from scratch. I've always come in when it's kind of there, and then improved it by adding tracking on certain buttons and things like that. So you'd have to ask it. I always see I'm always in all these like growth and marketing groups. And everyone's like, can someone help me with Google Analytics? So you're in the same boat as a lot of experts out there, I think, because Google Analytics is quite tricky. But as long as you can just pull a few things from it, that's good.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure cohort members have a response to that question. Actually, last one. At what point do you think it makes sense to kind of hold someone's hand through the onboarding experience? So obviously you're talking about like these moments, or someone goes on the website and then they click that button and then they download the free trial. When do you think it's worthwhile having a kind of a human intervention where you actually have a call with someone and you help them with the onboarding? I know there might be a distinction between B2B and B2C, but if you want to get that conversion, is there any time that it makes sense from your, like just purely your time perspective, to actually sit down and spend 15, 30 minutes with people?
I think there's a couple things. The first thing is things don't have to be scalable in the early days. You have an assumption, which is like, I think that if people see a human face in onboarding, they will be more likely to convert. The best way you can test that and have a call with them and then measure whether those people convert better. And it might be the fact you're on a call, that it's not just a human face, but that's the best way to test that thing. It's not very scalable if you're a kind of B2C or B2B SaaS where you've got thousands of users coming in, you can't have all those calls. But in the early days, it's fine to do a white glove experience if you want to test an assumption. It's also an amazing way to talk to people and get close to the customer, but that's not very scalable if you're B2C or B2B SaaS. If you're sales, that might be part of your funnel. So I think if you're having a call as part of your funnel permanently, your price point needs to be really high. You need to think about it as, if that person's being paid 30k a year on a sales salary, they need to be bringing, those calls need to be bringing in 30k above what no call would bring in. Then that's paid for the salary of that salesperson on that call. So that's a sales loop. So I think there's two sides of it. One, early days, white glove experience, great for talking to customers, great for validating things, not very scalable. In the middle, there's like webinars, which is like one-to-many communication. And at the end, whether it's a sales loop, you need to make sure that those calls are incrementally worth together the salary of that person on that call, if that's all that that person does, obviously. But that's the commercial aspect of it.
Thank you so much. That's been so useful. Thanks for all those tips. Rosie, we will say thank you and then let you go. For the cohort members, do stick around because we've got another session right now. Oh, Rosie, actually one quick thing before you go. If anybody wants to chat to you, what is the best way to find you?
Just find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn DM is probably the best. My name's quite hard to spell, but have a go. And also Growth Dives newsletter, which is every Friday. It's like a product-led growth teardown of a big product. So yeah.
We'll post your LinkedIn link into the chat as well, so everyone can find you. Thank you so much.
Have a fab day. Bye.
Thanks,
Enjoy.
Rosie. All right.